Bachchan Athwal. On a cold December evening in 1998, 27-year-old Surjit Kaur Athwal boarded a flight from London to India, excited to attend family weddings in Punjab. The Heathrow customs agent had no idea this journey, orchestrated by her mother-in-law, Bachchan Kaur Athwal, would be her last. Surjit's body was never recovered from the Ravi River. But the investigation that followed would expose one of Britain's most calculated family conspiracies. Surjit had been married to Sukhdev Athwal, Bachchan's son, but the relationship deteriorated after Surjit began an affair. When Surjit expressed her desire for divorce, it triggered a crisis within the traditional Sikh household in Hayes, West London. Divorce was considered a stain on family honor, something Bachchan could not tolerate. The 61-year-old matriarch declared at a family meeting that divorce would only happen over her dead body, wielding enormous influence over her extended family. Bachchan convinced Surjit to travel to India for wedding celebrations. Once in Punjab, the plan unfolded with precision. Surjit was drugged, then strangled, likely by Bachchan's brother, and her body was disposed of in the river. Back in the United Kingdom, Bachchan and Sukhdev immediately began constructing an elaborate cover story. They forged letters purporting to be from Surjit, claiming she had run away and started a new life. Insurance documents were fabricated to suggest Surjit had voluntarily disappeared. The absence of a body meant police initially treated the case as a missing person investigation rather than a homicide. The breakthrough came 6 years later, in 2004, when Surjit Athwal, Bachchan's daughter-in-law, finally broke what investigators called a code of silence. In detailed interviews with detectives, Surjit described how Bachchan had stated categorically that Surjit would not be allowed to divorce and bring shame upon them. She recounted the planning sessions and the family's determination to eliminate what they saw as a problem. Forensic investigators faced unique challenges given the absence of a body and the 6-year gap since Surjit's disappearance. Document analysis revealed the forged letters and insurance claims, with handwriting experts confirming they had not been written by Surjit. Financial records showed suspicious transactions following her disappearance. Phone records and travel documents helped establish the timeline of events in India. The circumstantial case built from paper trails and witness testimony proved overwhelming. In 2007, Bachchan Athwal and her son Sukhdev stood trial at the Old Bailey in London. The 3-month trial featured defense arguments that the evidence was purely circumstantial. But the jury found the combination of witness testimony, documentary evidence, and the defendant's own contradictory statements compelling. Both were convicted of murder. Judge Giles Forrester sentenced Bachchan Athwal to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years, later reduced to 15 years on appeal. Her son Sukhdev received a significantly higher minimum term of 27 years. In his sentencing remarks, the judge stated, "The pair of you decided that the so-called honor of your family members was worth more than the life of this young woman." Bachchan Athwal was released from prison in August 2022 after a parole board hearing, following the revocation and reinstatement of her license. Her release was granted largely due to dementia and declining health. She later returned to West London, but not all cases would take years to unravel. Tanya Monroe. In the early morning hours of a March day in 2016, emergency responders rushed to an apartment in Sandy Springs, Georgia, where Kobe Shaw had stopped breathing. His grandmother, 45-year-old Tanya Monroe, told paramedics she had found him unresponsive. The initial assessment suggested a sudden death, but the autopsy would later reveal something far more sinister. Kobe Shaw had been born with a rare genetic condition that left his brain underdeveloped His parents had been living with Monroe in her apartment, and she had taken on significant caregiving responsibilities. To neighbors, Monroe appeared to be a devoted grandmother, doing her best in difficult circumstances. The Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office performed a thorough autopsy. Toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of methamphetamine in his system, immediately transforming the investigation into a homicide case. When confronted with the autopsy findings, Monroe initially maintained her innocence, suggesting the results must be an error. As detectives pressed her on inconsistencies, she abruptly fled the jurisdiction. For nearly a month, she evaded law enforcement. United States Marshals eventually tracked her down and arrested her, bringing her back to Fulton County to face charges of malice murder, felony murder, cruelty, and distribution of methamphetamine to a minor. Law enforcement discovered evidence suggesting Monroe had access to methamphetamine and had been using the substance herself. Phone records and witness statements helped reconstruct her movements in the hours before Kobe's death. Prosecutors theorized she acted with deliberate malice, though establishing a clear motive proved challenging. Monroe's first trial in 2018 ended in a hung jury, with 11 jurors voting to convict and one holding out for acquittal. Prosecutors immediately began preparing for a retrial. The second prosecution was tried in court by Deputy District Attorney Lauren McCauley and Senior Assistant District Attorney Robert Shapiro. The retrial took place in 2022. Prosecutors presented enhanced forensic testimony, bringing in additional experts to explain how the methamphetamine entered Kobe's system and why the levels proved fatal. Medical professionals testified about the impossibility of accidental exposure at such concentrations. The defense struggled to overcome the scientific evidence and Monroe's flight from justice. After deliberations, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts: malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, cruelty, and distribution of substances. Judge Emily Richardson presided over the sentencing hearing in December 2022. Monroe remains incarcerated at Arendelle State Prison in Georgia, where she is serving her life sentence. While that case shocked a Georgia community, events unfolding in California would reveal how cultural pressures could drive someone to unthinkable acts. Beyond Core Dillon. On a November morning in 2018, social workers in Bakersfield, California, received a disturbing report from a teenage girl claiming she had given birth alone and that her newborn had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The investigation that followed would uncover a burial in a backyard and lead detectives to 43-year-old Bint Core Dillon, whose fear of community judgment had allegedly driven her to an irreversible decision. The teenage girl had concealed her pregnancy from everyone except immediate family members. When she went into labor, she delivered the baby largely unassisted at the family home on Shining Crag Avenue in southwest Bakersfield. What happened in those crucial hours after birth became the focus of intense investigation. According to court documents, Dillon drowned the newborn in a bathtub shortly after birth, then enlisted the help of a nephew to bury the tiny body in the backyard. The burial was crude and hurried, suggesting panic and desperation. The family had immigrated from India to California, bringing with them traditional values that placed enormous emphasis on family reputation within the tight-knit Punjabi Sikh community. An unwed teenage pregnancy represented what Dillon apparently viewed as an unbearable disgrace. When the teenager finally reported what had happened to a social worker, law enforcement immediately responded to the home. Detectives interviewed family members and began searching the property. The body was located in the backyard and carefully exhumed. The Kern County Medical Examiner performed an autopsy, which confirmed the cause of death as drowning. Forensic pathologists noted the infant had been born alive and healthy despite the circumstances. During police interviews, Dillon initially denied any involvement, claiming she had no knowledge of the pregnancy or birth. However, as evidence mounted and family members provided conflicting accounts, investigators pressed harder. The nephew who had assisted with the burial eventually provided detailed testimony about Dillon's instructions and his participation. Physical evidence from the burial site, including soil analysis and the condition of the remains, supported the timeline established by witnesses. The trial took place in Kern County Superior Court in 2020. The jury heard testimony from medical examiners about the drowning, forensic specialists about the burial, and family members about the events surrounding the birth. After deliberating, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. During sentencing proceedings, Dillon made a rare statement to the court. "I killed the baby because I feared my community would speak poorly of my family." Judge John R. Brownlee sentenced her to 25 years to life in state prison, plus an additional 4 years for related charges. An appeal challenging the conviction was rejected in 2023, with appellate judges finding no errors in the trial proceedings. Dillon remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility, where she is serving her sentence. The next case would emerge from a very different world, one of wealth and privilege. Donna Adelson. On a bright July morning in 2014, Florida State University law professor Dan Markell pulled into his driveway in Tallahassee after dropping his young sons at daycare. As he sat in his Honda Accord checking his phone, 2 men approached the vehicle and fired multiple shots through the window. The execution-style slaying shocked the academic community, but investigators would spend years unraveling a conspiracy that led directly to the victim's former mother-in-law, 75-year-old Donna Sue Adelson. Donna Adelson had built a successful life in South Florida, where she and her husband Harvey ran a lucrative dental practice. The family enjoyed considerable wealth and social standing in their Miami Beach community. When their daughter Wendy married Markell, a rising legal scholar, the union seemed promising. However, the relationship deteriorated, leading to divorce and a bitter custody battle over the couple's 2 sons. The custody arrangement kept them in Tallahassee, hundreds of miles from the Adelson family in Miami, a situation Donna reportedly found intolerable. In the immediate aftermath of Markell's shooting, Tallahassee Police Department investigators treated it as a possible robbery gone wrong. But that theory quickly crumbled. Nothing had been taken, and the targeted nature of the attack suggested something more personal. Detectives began examining Markell's life for enemies or conflicts. The custody dispute with the Adelson family emerged as a significant area of interest. The investigation uncovered a complex conspiracy involving multiple individuals. Cell phone records showed suspicious communications between members of the Adelson family and various intermediaries in the weeks before the murder. Financial transactions revealed unusual payments that seemed designed to obscure their purpose. Surveillance footage from the day of the killing helped identify the shooter's vehicle, leading eventually to the arrest of the 2 gunmen. But they refused to cooperate about who had hired them. The breakthrough came through wiretaps and recorded jail calls. Charlie Adelson, Donna's son, was arrested and charged with orchestrating the murder plot. During his prosecution, evidence emerged suggesting Donna had been the driving force behind the conspiracy, motivated by her desperate desire to have her grandchildren nearby. Prosecutors alleged she had provided the money and encouragement, while Charlie handled the logistics. Donna Adelson maintained her innocence throughout the investigation. However, in November 2023, law enforcement arrested her at Miami International Airport as she prepared to board a one-way flight to Vietnam with her husband Harvey. The attempted flight suggested consciousness of guilt, prosecutors later argued, particularly given the timing shortly after Charlie's conviction. The trial began in September 2024 and lasted several weeks. Prosecutors presented cell phone records showing communications between family members around the time of the murder. Financial experts traced payments that allegedly funded the killing. Recorded conversations revealed discussions about the custody situation and apparent coded references to the plot. Charlie Adelson, already serving a life sentence, provided limited testimony, but his conviction stood as powerful evidence. Most damaging were recorded jail calls and wiretapped conversations in which Donna discussed the case and her fears about being caught. While never explicitly admitting to the murder plot, her statements revealed detailed knowledge that prosecutors argued only made sense if she were involved. During the trial, Donna took the stand in her own defense, tearfully insisting on her innocence. "I swear to you, on my life, I was not involved in any way with Danny's murder," she told the jury. However, cross-examination exposed inconsistencies in her account and highlighted suspicious behavior, including the attempted flight to Vietnam. The jury deliberated for several hours before returning guilty verdicts on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder. At sentencing in late 2024, Judge Stephen Everett sentenced Donna Adelson to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years on the related charges. She was transferred to a state correctional facility where she continues to maintain her innocence while serving her sentence. Across the world, another grandmother had already built a reputation in a very different kind of family business. Judy Moran. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 15, 2009, 65-year-old Des Moran sat in his car outside a cafe in the Melbourne suburb of Ascot Vale, unaware these would be his final moments. Two men approached the vehicle and opened fire, shooting him multiple times before fleeing in a waiting car driven by his sister-in-law, Judy Moran, the 66-year-old matriarch of Melbourne's notorious Moran crime family. The brazen daylight execution would mark the end of decades of gangland violence. Judy Brooks had been born in 1944 in Melbourne, growing up in a working-class family before marrying into the Moran dynasty in the 1960s. Her husband, Leslie Cole, Johnny Moran, died in 2002, and her second husband, Louis Moran, was shot at a club in 2004. Her sons Jason and Mark had both been killed in gang conflicts that plagued Melbourne throughout the early 2000s. Conflicts largely centered around territorial disputes. Through it all, Judy had maintained a public persona as the grieving mother and widow, someone victimized by the situation rather than participating in it. The relationship between Judy and Des Moran, her brother-in-law, had deteriorated significantly in the years following Louis Moran's death. Disputes over money and control of remaining family assets created deep rifts. Des had taken control of certain family business interests, decisions that Judy reportedly viewed as theft from her and her deceased son's legacies. Tensions escalated through 2008 and into 2009, with family members describing increasingly hostile encounters between the two. On the morning of the shooting, surveillance cameras near the scene captured crucial footage. The video showed the shooters approaching Des Moran's car, the muzzle flashes, and their rapid escape to a waiting vehicle. License plate readers and traffic cameras tracked the getaway car's route through Melbourne's streets. Victoria Police identified the vehicle and traced its movements back to Judy Moran, who had been behind the wheel during the escape. Within 24 hours of the murder, detectives arrested Judy Moran at her home. A search of the property uncovered hidden weapons and clothing that matched descriptions from witnesses near the scene. Forensic analysis of the getaway vehicle revealed gunshot residue and other trace evidence linking it directly to the shooting. Phone records showed communications between Judy and the shooters in the hours before Des Moran's death, suggesting coordination and planning. During initial interviews, Judy maintained her innocence, claiming she had been nowhere near the scene. However, as investigators presented the mounting evidence, including eyewitness accounts placing her in the driver's seat, her denials became increasingly untenable. She eventually exercised her right to silence, refusing to provide any explanation for her whereabouts or actions on the morning of June 15th. The trial commenced in the Supreme Court of Victoria in 2011. Prosecutors characterized Judy as the mastermind behind the execution, someone who had coordinated the hit and provided logistical support by driving the getaway vehicle. The Crown presented surveillance footage, forensic evidence from the car, and testimony from witnesses. Financial records documented the disputes between Judy and Des over money and property, establishing motive. The defense argued that Judy had been coerced or manipulated into participating, portraying her as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. They emphasized her losses over the years, suggesting she had been traumatized by the deaths of family members. In a pre-trial interview, Judy had stated, "I wouldn't be involved in anything like that at my age now," attempting to distance herself from the violent reputation of the Moran family. The jury deliberated for several days before finding Judy Moran guilty of murder. Justice Lex Lasry sentenced Judy to 26 years in prison with a non-parole period of 21 years, noting the calculated nature of the crime and her central role in the conspiracy. Judy Moran remains incarcerated at Dame Phyllis Frost Center in Victoria, where at age 81 she continues to serve her sentence. In 2024, her legal team launched a bid for freedom, arguing that her advanced age and time served warrant release. As of December 2025, authorities have not granted parole. While organized crime drove one grandmother to such acts, desperation would push another toward an international incident. Lindsay Sandiford. When British grandmother Lindsay June Sandiford stepped off a plane at Ngurah Rai International Airport in Bali on May 19, 2012, Indonesian customs officials pulled her aside for a routine baggage inspection. What they discovered inside her suitcase would lead to a death sentence and over a decade of international legal battles. 4 points of illegal substances, with a street value of approximately 1.6 million British pounds. The 56-year-old legal secretary from Redcar, England, would claim she had been coerced into smuggling through threats against her family. Sandiford had traveled from Bangkok to Bali, a route commonly used by traffickers moving contraband into Indonesia. Airport security screeners selected her bag for additional inspection, and X-ray machines revealed suspicious dense packages hidden within her luggage. When customs officers opened the suitcase, they found the illegal substances expertly concealed among her belongings. Indonesian law enforcement immediately arrested Sandiford and began questioning her about the source of the contraband and her intended recipients. During initial interrogation, Sandiford cooperated with authorities, providing information about the trafficking network that had allegedly forced her participation. She told investigators that threats had been made against her sons, creating a situation where she felt compelled to transport the illegal substances or risk harm to her family. Indonesian police used her information to set up operations, which resulted in the arrest of several other individuals allegedly involved in the smuggling ring, including British nationals Rachel Dougal and Julian Ponder. The cooperation Sandiford provided led prosecutors to initially indicate they would seek a lighter sentence, recommending 15 years rather than the death penalty that Indonesian law allowed for trafficking. However, when the case went to trial at Denpasar District Court in January 2013, the judges ignored the prosecution's recommendation. They argued that the quantity of illegal substances demonstrated serious intent and that Indonesia's tough stance required harsh penalties to serve as deterrents. Sandiford's defense team presented evidence of her mental health struggles including depression, and argued she had been vulnerable to exploitation by the traffickers. Character witnesses testified about her previously law-abiding life and her work as a legal secretary. She maintained throughout the trial, "The lives of my children were in danger, and I felt I had to protect them," describing how the organization had manipulated her fears to secure her compliance. Despite her cooperation with authorities and the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense, the three-judge panel found her guilty of trafficking. The verdict in January 2013 stunned observers when the judges sentenced Sandiford to death by firing squad, a harsher penalty than what prosecutors had sought, and far more severe than the sentences given to other members of the smuggling ring she had helped expose. Legal experts noted the apparent inconsistency, with those Sandiford's information had helped convict receiving substantially lighter sentences. Sandiford's legal team immediately filed appeals through the Indonesian court system. The British government, while providing consular assistance, maintained its policy of not intervening in legal processes of other countries or providing financial support for legal fees. Sandiford spent years fighting her sentence through appeals, with each rejection bringing her closer to execution. She remained in Karobokan prison in Bali, where conditions were notoriously harsh and where she faced an uncertain future. As years passed, Sandiford's health deteriorated significantly. By 2025, at age 69, she suffered from serious medical conditions that prison authorities struggled to manage. Despite rumors of potential diplomatic intervention, Sandiford remains on death row in Karobokan prison, awaiting execution. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The consequences in these cases stretched across continents. But closer to home, a different kind of family situation was unfolding. Carrie Ives. In the small town of Shotton, North Wales, 2-year-old Ethan Ives Griffiths lived with his paternal grandparents, Carrie and Michael Ives. The home on Beatrice Avenue appeared ordinary from the outside, but court documents would later reveal conditions inside that shocked investigators. On December 18, 2021, emergency services received a call reporting that Ethan had become unresponsive. Despite attempts at resuscitation, medical personnel pronounced him deceased shortly after arrival at the hospital. Carrie Ives, 46 years old at the time of her arrest, had taken custody of Ethan along with her husband Michael. Initial interviews with the grandparents raised red flags for detectives, who noted inconsistencies in their accounts. Carrie claimed Ethan had simply stopped breathing, but the medical evidence told a dramatically different story. The autopsy performed by forensic pathologists revealed extensive injuries across Ethan's body. Medical examiners documented more than 40 separate bruises in various stages of healing, indicating repeated incidents over an extended period. The cause of death was determined to be a catastrophic head injury resulting from blunt force trauma. Additional findings included signs of malnourishment and dehydration, suggesting prolonged neglect alongside the harm. North Wales Police launched a comprehensive investigation, seizing electronic devices from the Ives household and conducting extensive interviews. Closed-circuit television footage from inside the home proved crucial, capturing scenes that prosecutors would present as evidence of a sustained campaign. Text messages between Carrie and Michael revealed their attitudes toward Ethan, with language that demonstrated hostility rather than care. The digital evidence painted a picture of grandparents who viewed their grandson as a burden. Forensic analysts examined the CCTV recordings frame by frame, establishing a timeline of events in the hours and days before Ethan's death. The footage showed Michael present during incidents, with one particularly damning segment capturing him assaulting Ethan. This visual evidence contradicted defense claims that the grandparents had been unaware of or powerless to prevent the mistreatment. During interrogation, both Carrie and Michael initially denied responsibility, each attempting to shift blame to the other or suggesting Ethan had injured himself through accidents. However, the overwhelming physical evidence made their denials untenable. Medical experts testified that the pattern of injuries could not have resulted from normal accidents and were instead consistent with intentional infliction over an extended period. The case proceeded to trial at Mold Crown Court, where prosecutors presented the evidence to a jury over several weeks of testimony. Expert witnesses included pediatric pathologists, forensic analysts, and specialists who explained the medical findings and their significance. The CCTV footage proved particularly impactful, providing direct visual evidence of the environment Ethan endured. Text messages were read aloud in court, revealing conversations that demonstrated awareness and intent. In October 2024, after deliberating the extensive evidence, the jury returned guilty verdicts against both Carrie and Michael Ives for murder. Judge Reese Rowlands described the case as one of shocking cruelty, noting that both defendants had participated in what he characterized as a deliberate campaign. The judge emphasized Michael's active participation, while noting Carrie failed to protect him despite knowing of the violence, stating this demonstrated callous disregard for her grandson's suffering. In October 2024, Judge Rowlands sentenced Carrie Ives to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years before parole consideration. Michael received life with a minimum of 14 years. Carrie Ives remains incarcerated in a women's prison in the United Kingdom. The courts had spoken clearly about accountability, but in another jurisdiction years earlier, justice had followed a different timeline. Theda Rice. In the Los Angeles suburb of Norwalk, California, 4-year-old Daniel Moalo lived with his grandmother, Theda Darlene Rice. On August 4, 1996, paramedics received an emergency call requesting immediate assistance at Rice's home. When emergency responders arrived, they found Daniel unconscious with extensive injuries across his body. Despite efforts to save him, he was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival at the hospital. Theda Rice, 54 years old at the time, had been caring for Daniel after family circumstances resulted in his placement with her. The initial police response treated the death as suspicious, given the visible trauma on Daniel's body and circumstances that did not align with the medical evidence. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department began a homicide investigation. The autopsy conducted by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner revealed the true extent of Daniel's suffering. Forensic pathologists documented multiple contusions, lacerations, and evidence of both recent and healing injuries indicating prolonged mistreatment. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma combined with complications from sustained harm. Additional findings included evidence that Daniel had been restrained, with marks on his wrists and ankles consistent with being bound. Investigators discovered that child welfare authorities had actually visited the Rice residence the day before Daniel's death. Social workers had received reports of potential concerns regarding Daniel's well-being and conducted a home visit to assess the situation. However, during that visit, they did not observe sufficient evidence to warrant removing Daniel from Rice's care. This revelation would later spark significant criticism of the child welfare system. The timing of the welfare check, occurring just 24 hours before Daniel's death, made the tragedy particularly haunting. During questioning by detectives, Rice provided accounts of Daniel's death that investigators found inconsistent with the physical evidence. She initially claimed the injuries resulted from accidents, suggesting Daniel had fallen or hurt himself during normal activities. However, forensic experts determined the pattern and severity of injuries could not have occurred through accidental means. The evidence of restraints and the nature of the trauma contradicted any explanation involving mishaps or self-inflicted harm. Prosecutors from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office charged Rice with murder, arguing that she had engaged in a pattern of intentional harm that ultimately resulted in Daniel's death. The investigation had uncovered no clear motive beyond what psychologists would later characterize as a fundamental failure of caregiving responsibility. The case proceeded to trial in Norwalk Superior Court in 1997. The prosecution presented the medical evidence, crime scene documentation, and expert testimony explaining how the injuries had been inflicted and why they could not have been accidental. The jury found Theda Rice guilty of second-degree murder after reviewing the extensive evidence presented during the trial. In May 1997, the judge sentenced Rice to 15 years to life in state prison, a term reflecting both the severity of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim. Theda Rice was released on parole in 2017. Yet another family arrangement would lead to devastating consequences in North Carolina. Patricia Ann Ricks. Patricia Ann Ricks. In the rural community of Nashville, North Carolina, located in Nash County, Patricia Ann Ricks served as legal guardian for several relatives following family circumstances that necessitated alternative care arrangements. Among those in her care was 8-year-old Crystal Lane. On February 7, 2023, emergency services responded to Ricks' residence after receiving a call about an unresponsive individual. When paramedics arrived, they found Crystal with catastrophic injuries. Despite immediate medical intervention, she was pronounced deceased. Patricia Ann Ricks, 72 years old at the time of the incident, initially told responding officers that Crystal had been injured in an accident. According to Ricks' initial account, the situation had occurred suddenly and unexpectedly. However, the severity and nature of Crystal's injuries immediately raised suspicions among the medical personnel and law enforcement officers at the scene. The Nash County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, treating the death as potentially criminal from the outset. The medical examination revealed extensive trauma inconsistent with any accidental scenario Ricks had described. Forensic pathologists documented severe injuries across Crystal's body, including internal damage that could only have resulted from significant force. The autopsy determined that Crystal had been subjected to a sustained assault involving multiple impacts from various implements. Evidence suggested the use of objects including a plunger and other household items as instruments of harm. During the investigation, detectives interviewed other individuals who had been present in the household. Crystal's siblings provided crucial testimony about what they had witnessed in the home, describing incidents of harsh treatment that had escalated over time. These interviews revealed a pattern of increasingly severe responses to perceived misbehavior, with discipline crossing into territory that constituted assault. The accounts aligned with the physical evidence, providing investigators with a clear picture of the circumstances. Forensic analysis of the scene yielded additional evidence supporting the conclusion that Crystal had been deliberately harmed. Investigators documented the presence of implements that matched the injury patterns observed during the autopsy. Blood evidence and other physical traces helped reconstruct the sequence of events in Crystal's final hours. The combination of medical findings, witness statements, and physical evidence from the scene created an overwhelming case for prosecution. One particularly troubling aspect of the investigation involved Rick's medical history. According to later court proceedings, Ricks had cognitive issues, a factor that the defense would successfully present as relevant to her mental state. Initially, Ricks maintained that Crystal's death had been accidental and that she loved all of those in her care. It was an accident, she insisted during early interactions with law enforcement, attempting to characterize the situation as a tragic mishap rather than an intentional act. However, as the evidence mounted and prosecutors prepared to take the case to trial, the likelihood of successfully defending against charges diminished substantially. Facing the prospect of a trial where the evidence against her appeared insurmountable, Ricks ultimately decided to accept a plea agreement with prosecutors. In January 2025, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder as well as related charges. The guilty plea spared the family the trauma of a public trial and ensured a certain outcome. During the sentencing phase, the court heard victim impact statements from relatives describing the profound loss of Crystal. The court sentenced Patricia Ann Ricks to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in North Carolina. At 74 years old at the time of sentencing, the life sentence effectively ensures Ricks will spend her remaining years in custody. Patricia Ann Ricks is currently incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. In another part of the country, a different form of discipline would prove equally fatal. Joyce Harden Garrard. In the small town of Attalla, Alabama, located in Etowah County, 9-year-old Savannah Harden lived with her grandmother, Joyce Harden Garrard, and step-grandfather, after family circumstances resulted in their custody. On February 17, 2012, neighbors noticed unusual activity at the Garrard residence on Lloyd Nolan Road. Savannah had been outside for hours, running continuously in what Garrard later described as punishment for lying about eating candy at school. The temperature that day hovered around mid-30s Fahrenheit, and Savannah wore inadequate clothing for extended outdoor exposure. Joyce Harden Garrard, approximately 50 years old at the time, had implemented what she characterized as a disciplinary measure in response to a school report about Savannah's behavior. According to later testimony, Garrard ordered Savannah to run continuously around the property, carrying objects to increase the physical difficulty of the task. Witnesses who observed the situation described seeing Savannah running for approximately 3 hours, appearing increasingly distressed as time progressed. Garrard allegedly told others that Savannah would continue running until she decided the punishment was complete. As the hours passed, Savannah's condition deteriorated visibly. She began to stumble and show signs of severe physical distress, eventually collapsing in the yard. When Garrard finally called for emergency assistance, paramedics found Savannah in critical condition with a body temperature that had dropped dangerously low and other signs of severe physiological breakdown. She was rushed to Children's Hospital in Birmingham, but despite aggressive medical intervention, Savannah never regained consciousness. She died 3 days later on February 22, 2012. The autopsy performed by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences revealed that Savannah had died from complications related to severe dehydration and rhabdomyolysis, a condition where muscle tissue breaks down and releases harmful proteins into the bloodstream. The extended forced running had caused Savannah's muscles to begin destroying themselves, leading to kidney failure and other cascading organ system failures. The medical examiner determined the manner of death to be homicide, meaning Savannah's death resulted directly from the actions of another person. The Etowah County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, interviewing witnesses who had seen Savannah running and examining the circumstances surrounding her death. Investigators obtained video evidence that proved crucial to the prosecution, including footage showing Savannah's deteriorating condition during the punishment and recording Garrard's statements about continuing the running until she decided to stop. On the video, Garrard could be heard saying, "She's going to run until I tell her to stop," demonstrating awareness that she controlled the duration and intensity of the ordeal. The trial took place in Etowah County Circuit Court in March 2015. The prosecution presented the video evidence, medical testimony about the cause of death, and witness accounts of what they had observed. Forensic experts explained to the jury how extended running without water breaks or rest in cold weather conditions had triggered the physiological cascade that resulted in death. The video footage of Gerard's statements proved particularly impactful, allowing jurors to hear directly her acknowledgement that she controlled when the punishment would end. After deliberating the evidence, the jury found Joyce Harden Gerard guilty of capital murder. During sentencing in May 2015, Judge Randall Cole sentenced Gerard to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence for capital murder in Alabama. Joyce Harden Gerard was transported to the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama, to begin serving her life sentence. However, her incarceration would prove brief. In February 2016, approximately 9 months after her sentencing, Gerard died while in custody. The Alabama Department of Corrections reported that she had died of natural causes related to health conditions. She was approximately 54 years old at the time of her death. The pattern of grandparents as perpetrators, rather than protectors, continued in Florida. Martha White. In Leon County, Florida, 6-year-old Mason Reinhardt lived with his grandmother, 63-year-old Martha Ann White, in her Tallahassee home after family circumstances resulted in her taking custody. On August 5, 2014, emergency dispatchers received a frantic call from Mason's 8-year-old brother, who reported that something terrible had happened to his sibling. The distressed voice on the emergency line described a scene that would shock even experienced first responders. When Leon County Sheriff's deputies and paramedics arrived at White's residence on Rosewood Road, they found Mason in the bathroom with multiple stab wounds. Despite immediate medical intervention, Mason was pronounced deceased at the scene. The bathroom door had been locked from the inside, with Martha White found nearby covered in blood. The 8-year-old brother told responding officers he had heard his brother crying out from inside the locked bathroom, pleading for help. Investigators from the Leon County Sheriff's Office secured the scene and began documenting the evidence. Forensic analysis revealed that Mason had suffered numerous stab wounds, with the pattern and placement of injuries suggesting a sustained attack rather than a single impulsive act. The medical examiner's autopsy confirmed that Mason had died from the stab wounds, with no evidence of any other contributing factors. The bathroom where the attack occurred contained physical evidence consistent with a struggle. The 8-year-old brother's account proved crucial to understanding the sequence of events. He told investigators that he had heard Mason crying from inside the locked bathroom, with his brother's voice calling out, "I don't want to die. Please don't kill me," before the sound stopped. The brother had attempted to open the bathroom door but found it locked from inside. Unable to access his brother and terrified by what he was hearing, he had called emergency services. His father, who was not present at the home during the incident, received a call from the boy and rushed to the scene, arriving shortly after emergency responders. Martha White was immediately taken into custody and transported to the Leon County Detention Facility. During initial questioning, she provided limited information about what had occurred in the bathroom. Investigators noted that White appeared to be in an agitated mental state, though she was deemed competent to understand her situation and the charges she faced. Prosecutors charged White with first-degree murder, reflecting the intentional nature of the attack. As the case moved through the legal system, questions arose about White's mental state both at the time of the offense and during the proceedings. Psychological evaluations were conducted to assess her competency to stand trial and her mental condition when Mason was killed. White's defense team indicated she had been experiencing significant mental health challenges, though the specific nature and extent of these issues were not fully detailed in public court records. Rather than proceeding to trial, negotiations between the defense and prosecution resulted in a plea agreement. In April 2016, Martha White entered a no-contest plea to first-degree murder, a legal position where she did not admit guilt but acknowledged that sufficient evidence existed for a conviction. The plea meant that the case would move directly to sentencing without a trial. During the sentencing hearing, Mason's mother addressed the court, describing the devastating loss of her son and the incomprehensible nature of his death at the hands of his own grandmother. She spoke of Martha White having ruined her own life through her actions, emphasizing that White's decisions had destroyed multiple lives, including her own. Leon County Circuit Court Judge James C. Hankinson sentenced Martha White to life in prison, plus an additional 15 years on related charges. The sentence structure ensured that White would spend the remainder of her life in custody. Judge Hankinson noted during sentencing that Mason had been particularly vulnerable, dependent on adults for care and protection. Martha White remains incarcerated in the Florida State Prison System. Far from Florida, another grandmother's actions would lead to similar consequences. Patricia Batts. In the tourist town of West Yellowstone, Montana, situated near the western entrance to Yellowstone National Park, 12-year-old Alex Hurley lived with his grandmother, Patricia Batts, and other family members. In February 2020, emergency services received a report of an unresponsive individual at the Batts residence. When medical personnel arrived, they found Alex in critical condition with extensive injuries across his body. Despite immediate transport to medical facilities, Alex was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. Patricia Batts, approximately 60 years old at the time, initially told responding officers that Alex had been injured accidentally. However, the nature and extent of Alex's injuries immediately raised suspicions among the medical professionals and law enforcement officers who responded to the scene. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, treating the death as potentially criminal from the outset. The autopsy conducted by the Montana State Crime Lab revealed catastrophic injuries that could not have resulted from any accidental scenario. Medical examiners documented evidence of prolonged mistreatment, including both recent trauma and healing injuries that indicated repeated incidents over an extended period. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, combined with complications from sustained harm. The forensic findings made clear that Alex had been subjected to ongoing infliction of injury. During the investigation, detectives made a discovery that would prove crucial to the prosecution. Video evidence on mobile phones belonging to household members. These recordings showed Alex being subjected to various forms of mistreatment, documented by the perpetrators themselves. The videos provided incontrovertible evidence of the conditions Alex endured and the active participation of multiple individuals in his suffering. Forensic analysts examined the digital evidence, establishing timelines and identifying the persons visible in the recordings. The investigation revealed that Patricia Batts had not directly inflicted the fatal blow, but had been present for and facilitated the ongoing mistreatment that led to Alex's death. Her son, James Hurley Sasser Jr., was identified as having delivered the final fatal assault. But prosecutors argued that Batts bore responsibility for creating and maintaining the environment where such treatment was possible. The video evidence showed her awareness of and participation in earlier incidents. Prosecutors from the Montana Attorney General's office charged Patricia Batts with deliberate homicide, along with additional charges related to endangerment and tampering with evidence. The tampering charge stemmed from attempts to conceal or destroy evidence following Alex's death, including efforts to hide or delete the video recordings that ultimately proved so damaging to the defense. Rather than proceeding to trial, Patricia Batts ultimately accepted a plea agreement with prosecutors. In August 2023, she pleaded guilty to deliberate homicide and related charges, including endangerment and tampering with evidence. The guilty plea meant admitting responsibility for her role in Alex's death and the circumstances that led to it. During the sentencing phase, Montana District Court Judge Holly Brown described the case as horrific, emphasizing that the treatment of Alex had been carried out with malevolence. The judge noted that Batts had occupied a position of authority and responsibility as Alex's grandmother, a role that should have meant protection and care, but had instead resulted in facilitation of harm. Judge Brown sentenced Patricia Batts to life in prison, along with concurrent 10-year sentences on each of the endangerment and tampering charges. The life sentence ensures that Batts will remain in custody for the remainder of her life. Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen issued a statement following sentencing, noting that the sentence reflected the severity of the crime and the need to hold accountable those who harm vulnerable individuals in their care. Patricia Batts remains incarcerated at the Montana Women's Prison in Billings, where she is serving her life sentence. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.